Ralph has to do a lot of things to make me look good. But there's the cue. Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's June 9th, 2023 program, Rental Housing and Tenant Protections in Eugene. My name's Andrew Kallick, and I am City Club's president. Today, City Club comes to you live from the 5th Street Market District in the heart of downtown Eugene. And it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us in person, online, and over the radio. For 3 decades, the City Club of Eugene has remained dedicated to its founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, learn something new, and take active steps to make a difference in the city and region that we all love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone. A special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information is available at kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and lived ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene and Lane County for their support. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a longtime listener, I invite you to support our work by becoming an individual member, a business or community sponsor, or just suggest an idea for an upcoming program. You can do all of those things and more at cityclubofeugene.org. Your support and engagement make these community conversations possible. And of course, City Club isn't just about conversation. It's about taking that conversation and translating it into action. And today's program is a great example of that. On June 26th, the Eugene City Council will host a work session on a new set of proposed renter protections. In advance of that session, we are proud to host a spirited debate about the future of rental housing and tenant protections in Eugene. And we hope that the discussion motivates and informs your civic engagement. Our debate will be moderated by KLCC's Chris Lehman and will feature Tim Morris, the Executive Director of the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association, and Tia Politi, the President of the Rental Owner Association of Lane County. As a reminder, last July, the Council approved what's known as Phase 1 rental protections, including capping rental application and screening fees to $10 per applicant, which was later struck down by the Oregon courts, and requiring landlords to provide rental histories, as well as itemizing and photographing property conditions at move-in and move-out. This year, the Council is considering limiting security deposits to no more than twice the monthly rent and requiring landlords to pay displacement assistance for legal, no-cause evictions. These efforts come as the housing market in Eugene and Springfield continues to suffer from limited supply, while high inflation and rising interest rates have raised both the cost of living for tenants and the cost of maintenance and mortgages for landlords. Before we get to the debate portion of our program, I'm honored to introduce Tim Dewey, a professor of economics at the University of Oregon, who will provide us with a short presentation and his perspective on housing affordability in our area. Tim's the Senior Director of the Oregon Economic Forum and the author of the University of Oregon Statewide Economic Indicators, Regional Economic Indicators, and the Central Oregon Business Index. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold from last week, so I'll try to keep my voice clear. Today, the City Club is tackling the topic of rental housing and tenant protections. My role here is to place this debate in the context of the larger economic situation. And in this case, that context is the availability of housing at any cost in the region. The recent Oregon Housing Needs Analysis produced for the legislature estimates, using a revised methodology, that the Willamette Valley needs almost 22,000 housing units to compensate for past underproduction and another 9,000 units to address homelessness in the region. That's 31,000 units above what the 98,000 expected to be needed to address future population needs. That means the Willamette Valley will need to boost production by 30% over that already needed to match the expected population growth in order to compensate for past production shortfalls and homelessness. That's an enormous task that lies ahead for the region, for the state, is to boost production of housing to that's necessary to properly house our population. Higher housing costs are a consequence of the lack of housing supply. It's estimated that 58% of overall households and 44% of renters in the Eugene-Springfield region experience a housing cost burden of 30% or more of their income. 21% of households and 30% of renters suffer housing burdens of more than 50%. According to the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, the Lane County aggregate numbers are biased slightly upward because of the high number of student households that we have in the population. And so if you account for that, the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis estimates that 42% of non-student renters are housing burdened. So a small but noted caveat. That caveat aside, lower income households with high housing cost burdens face unstable housing situations, including increased risk of homelessness, which we also know is already a problem in the community. The low housing supply is also reflected in the low inventory of homes for sale. In May, there was only 1.7 months of housing inventory available at the current pace of sales in Lane County. Well, up from 0.9% a year ago, it's still well below the 6 months of inventory that we used to say was a balanced market where buyers and sellers had equal opportunities. And it's really amazing that this is the case even though mortgage rates have risen into the 6 to 7% range. And that sort of speaks to just the underlying demand for housing and the shortage in the community. A lack of sufficient housing burdens household budgets and the region's economy. To secure affordable housing, some might need to endure longer commutes, and some might relocate away from the region altogether. According to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, Lane County's population fell by 0.4% in 2022. That's the first decline since the painful economic adjustments of the early 1980s. The estimate from Portland State University is only slightly more optimistic, with a 0.07% gain. So essentially, regional population has suddenly stagnated. And one potential reason for this is people either relocating from the area or avoiding the area altogether because of the lack of housing supply. And this is not something that just affects Eugene. It's broader, I think, across a lot of West Coast communities that really have not made enough investments in housing in recent decades. So increasing housing requires a mix of boosting both market rate and subsidized housing. The less market rate housing that's supplied to the market, the more the region will need to compensate with subsidized housing, placing additional strains on already tight local budgets. Renter protections, such as those being discussed today, stand at the intersection of housing supply and demand. There's a balance between providing protections for renters versus the need for landlords to be compensated sufficiently for bringing product to market. Insufficient protections for renters from potentially unscrupulous landlords will leave some households at a high risk of housing instability or unsafe living conditions. On the other hand, excessive renter protections raise the financial risks faced by landlords who will need to be compensated for that risk. The result would be to bring fewer units to market and place additional upward pressure on regional housing costs. how to best balance out the interests of these two competing interests in the context of trying to optimize social welfare is the topic of today's debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We'll move now into our time of questions and answers for the panelists after they each give an opening statement. Each of our panelists will have about 2 minutes to lay out their thoughts, and then we'll go into the question and answer time. So I'd like to invite forward first Tim Morris of the Springfield Eugene Tenants Association, and he'll be followed by Tia Politi of the Rental Owners Association of Lane County and the Oregon Rental Housing Association. Tim?
Ooh. Good afternoon, everyone. I was just commenting that I've reached the age where I can't read things off my phone anymore, so go on paper. Whew. Good afternoon, members of the Eugene City Club and renters tuning into the radio. My name is Timothy Morris. I'm the Executive Director of the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. It's great to be here today. Today we're going to talk about common sense consumer protections that have a profound impact on our region's housing and homelessness crisis. Phase 2 renter protections does 3 simple things. 1, it sets limits on security deposits, which is one of the top barriers to exiting homelessness, 2, it addresses the easiest way that landlords discriminate against tenants by requiring them to process applications in the order that they are received. And 3, it creates displacement prevention assistance, which shifts the economic consequences of a landlord's business decision from the tenant to the landlord when tenants are pushed out of their home through no fault of their own. This shift dramatically increases the likelihood of a tenant finding a comparable unit in a short notice. Consumer protections are a common and necessary function of government. Our community has a vested interest in implementing these anti-displacement measures. Right now, no-cause evictions and obscene rent increases are a one-way ticket to homelessness, and the cost to the taxpayers and local businesses are piling up. Landlords are currently able to externalize the consequences of their own profit-seeking decisions to the community at large. We will learn more about these protections. I want to comment that displacement prevention assistance in particular is a successful strategy that is spreading up and down the West Coast. In February of this year, the city of Los Angeles joined Portland, Oakland, Long Beach, Bellingham, and several other cities in adopting these protections. Today we will hear similar arguments, as this has been a conversation happening in the city of Eugene since 2015. I really encourage you to pay close attention to both how myself and Ms. Politi will frame some of these conversations. Tenants come to the table with their own personal experiences of being dehumanized and being treated poorly in their own homes. Tenants will come with data and information, and landlords will come to the table with thinly veiled threats of raising rent increases or pulling out of the market. I'm here to invest in our community. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. I want to thank the City Club for inviting me to join you today. We do have a housing crisis, but it's not because of unscrupulous landlords. Are there unscrupulous landlords? Absolutely, there are. I grew up in poverty. My mother was a beautiful woman, and she was sexually harassed by one of our landlords. It never felt good to be in that kind of situation. So I come to this from a perspective of having been there, having grown up my entire young life, having been a renter. Most of the experiences were good. And in my experience in my own rentals, I'm a small timer. My husband and I have 4 units. We have great relationships with our renters and very long-term tenants. Are renter protections needed? I would argue that we have robust renter protections in the law that exists now. In fact, I just got done writing an article about landlord penalties. There are robust landlord penalties in law for landlords who break the law, who treat their tenants badly. The need I see isn't for more protections for renters. It's for educating renters on how to access those protections, how to hold their landlord accountable. I managed to get 5 months of rent for my uncle out of his unscrupulous landlord and rehomed him. It's not a matter of there not being enough protections. It's a matter of education. And so for that reason, I've developed a class for high school seniors and college freshmen, and it's called Renting a Home, Renters' Rights, Risks, and Responsibilities. And I teach that, and I offer it to anyone free who wants to teach it at their local high school. I just recently taught it at OSU, and I get really good response from that. People don't know what they don't know, and I didn't know what I didn't know. When I was in life skills training, they taught me how to balance a checkbook, but not what it meant to be jointly and severally liable. And as a result, at the age of 21, I kept paying my part of the rent, my roommates stopped paying theirs, and we all got evicted. So I've been there, and I've been in a position of being evicted. I've lived in a school bus, I've lived in a yurt, I lived in my car for a while, so I've been on the other side of this situation. My husband also has grew up in poverty, and for us to just be able to build something for our future, the way for us was through rental property ownership.
I'll now invite both of our panelists to come and have a seat here. There is a microphone that you can pass back and forth to each other. And I'll be asking a series of questions. Some of them may be more applicable to one or the other, but of course I'd like both of you to weigh in on each of the questions as we go through the hour. And again, have about a minute or so so we can ask as many questions as possible, a minute or so per person. So just to kind of summarize some of the things I've heard and read about in preparing for this, shelter is arguably a fundamental human right. We all need protection from the elements, whether it's soaking winter rains or scorching summer heat. And our children especially need a safe, secure place to live in order to thrive and be healthy. At the same time, though, real estate is a major investment, and our society does not, as a rule, expect private property owners to offer housing at a financial loss. So my questions today will explore some of that tension between the need for housing and the practical aspects of being a housing provider. My first question will go to Tim. Tim, your organization says on its website that, quote, housing rights are human rights. So if housing is in fact a human right, should private citizens, namely property owners, even be a part of our society's answer when it comes to fulfilling that human right?
Thank you for the question. Oh, this is not on. Test. Perfect. Thank you for the question. That is a challenging question to answer, and I think that requires an oversight of our community and our society as a whole. At this moment, private rental market properties is what the solution is to finding housing. And the cities and counties are not investing enough in public housing to be able to prevent people from falling into homelessness. So it's not a question of what I think would be the most ideal, it's a question of what the reality is that tenants are facing every day. Right now, the average homeowner income household is $70,000. The average renter income household is $32,000. So there is economic consequences that renters are facing every single day right now.
Tia?
I would just respond to what you said, Tim, in that typically the typical landlord household is an older demographic and your typical renter is a younger demographic, which could skew those statistics. What was the question?
Oh, well, if housing is a sort of a fundamental human right,
Right.
should...
And how do we provide that? So what I would like to see, I was talking to Tom and Judy over there before everyone came. What I would like to see is some creativity. I would like to see some creativity in our legislature. I think our governor has declared a homeless state of emergency and is asking us to think outside the box. And I've been wanting that for a long time. I would love to see tiny house communities where people could invest, start small. Not everybody needs a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, where there are different housing types, different housing models. And I've just been thrilled to see the explosive growth of Homes for Good. Steve Oakes over there is your housing developer. I was telling his wife Beth the other day, everywhere I go, there's new housing popping up, and that's part of the solution, but it's not all of the solution.
Thank you. Before we look ahead to some of the Phase 2 proposals that we've heard about, let's look backward briefly to something that was in Phase 1, the $10 cap on applicant screening fees. As was mentioned, a judge earlier this year threw that out. Tia, do you think there should be a limit to how much landlords can charge applicants? And if so, what would you say is a reasonable amount?
That's a hard question to answer because I don't charge for screening. I'm one of those landlords who chooses to absorb that as a business cost. But I only have 4 units and I have really long-term renters, so I don't do a lot of screening, so I'm not spending a lot of money. I think it costs what it costs to get the information. I agree, though. The stories I've heard of people spending hundreds of dollars and never getting a unit is a problem. And I think we're coming up with some creative solutions. I heard a creative solution called the One app, where somebody could, and I have ways of reducing screening costs by asking renters to produce their own credit report for me and doing my own checks and things like that. So I think, there's a lot of brains here, and we could come up with a solution for that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. At the first Phase 1 renter protections, many landlords came up and spoke about their own application screening process. Some charged nothing, some charged $70 or $80 per applicant per adult. One landlord in particular, which is a frightening sentiment, said that they charge such a high cost because it weeds out the bad tenants. And that's a concerning and dog whistle, in my opinion. We are unsure of, there is no common standard of what a rental application is, but what we do know is that tenants of color in particular spend twice as long trying to find new rental housing than white tenants. And tenants will spend 5 or 6 different times trying to find and secure a new unit. We have a vacancy rate of 2%. Your average city has a vacancy rate of 5 to 8%. What that means in real terms is that when a unit when a unit becomes available, it will have 20 or 30 applicants before the end of the day. So tenants are struggling to find new housing and are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars to try to secure new housing.
Thank you, Tim. And Tim, you mentioned something in Phase 2 that is called displacement protection assistance, and I thought it might be helpful, and Tia, I'll ask you to weigh in on this as well, but Tim, if you could describe what that is exactly, how it would work, and what the need is, why there's a need for that in your mind.
Yeah, so displacement prevention assistance is a concept and policy, as I mentioned, that is spreading up and down the West Coast. Essentially what it is that if in current landlord-tenant law, it's not in landlord-tenant law, but a standard common business practice in landlords is that if a tenant wants to break a lease early, they pay what's called a lease break fee. Sometimes it's 1.5 times rent, sometimes it's 3 times rent, sometimes they must pay rent until the unit is refilled by another tenant. It changes person to person. What displacement prevention assistance is essentially that same concept, but to the landlord. If the landlord wishes to break a contract early, that they must pay that lease break fee. I want to be abundantly clear that this is related to no-cause evictions, which are landlord-based reasons to remove a tenant. Landlords still have all the tools accessible for for-cause evictions. If a tenant is not paying rent, if a tenant is breaking the property, or causing a lot of issues in our community, those are still protections that exist, and Eugene Renter Protections is not touching those at all. No-cause evictions are an optional tool that landlords can utilize if they choose to do so, but now displacement prevention assistance is bringing forward an economic consequence to do so.
The only problem with that is that the result is, as our economist pointed out, less incentive for landlords to build or rent housing. It results in upward pressure on prices. As I learned in Econ 101 at LCC, you were introducing our sponsors, LCC and U of O. I've been to both schools, and they both were excellent, and I believe prepared me well for the future. But as I learned at Econ 101, it's about supply and demand, and it's about overregulation. So if you overregulate here, there's a beautiful city right across the river that's happy to not regulate. We have seen in Portland a more than 14% loss in single-family homes since their renter protections went into place. Are we opposed to all of them? No. I think what I am opposed to, and my members would likely agree, is DPA, especially in the first year, for no cause. We learn a lot about a renter in that first year. We need time to get to know them, see how they are. Screening is a tool, but it's not perfect at separating out successful tenancies from unsuccessful tenancies.
Thank you. And you kind of hinted at this as far as, incentives for landlords to stay or move elsewhere. And in fact, when we ran a story a few months ago on KLCC about the Phase 2 renter protection package, we were contacted by a local real estate broker who argued that, there was some well-meaning provisions and elements in it, but she said it would likely result in property owners exiting the Eugene market and investing in communities with fewer regulations. What specifically about this proposal would be so onerous that it would spur a landlord to go through the process of selling a property and buying new properties elsewhere? That's not something you just do with the snap of a finger, right? So what specifically could you see that could cause somebody to do that?
Well, I staff 5 landlord helplines from around the state, and I was speaking to a member the other day who just informed me, she's in Eugene, she's sold 15 of her 17 Eugene rentals and has taken her money to Arizona to invest. That's the consequence. And well, part of that is actually good because she said about half of those homes she was able to sell to her renters. So there's an increase in home ownership, which is great, but it does leave us with a lack of supply. We've got to address the supply side of this equation. If we address the supply side, and we educate renters, which is one of the things I am so actually supportive of CETA about, is that's what they're doing. And the renters will listen to them. They won't always listen to me. But a lot of times renters think they have rights they don't have. A lot of times renters are being abused and they need some good advice. And I think the CETA hotline is just the best way to go about letting somebody know whether they have a case or not. Legal aid, same thing. We consider them valued partners. They'll educate us and my members if we step over the line before they really smack us hard. And they'll also let the renter know what you think you know isn't so. And I appreciate that as well. I think education for both parties is the way to go.
So there's always this conversation of the intersection between housing affordability and renter protections. And from my perspective, it is not an either or, it is a yes and. I want to comment that in the city of Portland, which also passed its own displacement prevention assistance in 2017, the Portland apartment market, excuse me, I'm reading numbers here, but the Portland apartment market added 57 new market rate units in 2018, which was a 20% increase over 2017 when the renter protections were passed. That's according to CoStar. So this significant increase also bucked the national average, which had a 20% decrease in overall new market housing. So it seems that construction and renter protections do not seem to be correlated, and in fact, more construction happens in the city of Portland when these laws are passed. And I want to comment that CETA and that there are several education opportunities for renters and landlords and other things in this community, but as I shared earlier, the average renter household income is $32,000. You can't educate yourself out of being broke.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Tim. Inflation impacts everyone. This cost crunch makes it harder for people to pay their rent, especially when their wages are not rising as quickly as the price of things like groceries or fuel. But the cost of things that come out of a property owner's budget are also rising, whether that's landlord-supplied appliances or paying a contractor to make a building repairs, or depending on the rental agreement, that could include the cost of utilities for a landlord. So, Tim, what is a reasonable way for landlords to protect themselves from their increasing costs, while at the same time ensuring that their tenants' ability to pay the rent continues as well? I guess this kind of goes into, you mentioned incredible price increases. So how does a landlord protect themselves from their own increasing costs while continuing to make it affordable for a renter?
Thank you for the question. The great news is that that answer already exists. Senate Bill 608 is a law that was passed in 2019, and what it states is that rents can be increased by 7% plus the consumer price index, which is otherwise known as inflation. So landlords already have the opportunity to raise the rent based on what their own housing cost increase is. I want to also share, though, that that particular law is one that is taken advantage of. tenants are facing the maximum rent increase of 14.6%. And I encourage everyone here to go review or go watch the Eugene City Council Renter Protections public hearing, which was back in February, where several where several tenants from the Eugene Hotel, senior citizens, all came and spoke about how unaffordable it is to receive those $200 or $300 a month increase in rent. I spoke to many of those tenants myself, and it is extremely challenging to hear an individual in our community saying they hope that they pass away before they receive their rent increase because they simply can't afford it. So I really strongly encourage everyone to listen to what those seniors and our citizens and community members are saying about receiving those rent increases.
Thank you, Tim. Our surveys, we have started doing research through the Oregon Rental Housing Association. We've done 3 quarters now. And across the board, what we're seeing our landlords self-report is rent increases of under 5% across the board. Some very little, some a lot. I think that when Senate Bill 608 passed, there was a bit of a panic in the landlord market going, hey, for those of us who kept our rents below market, kept our rents low, how do we ever catch up unless we max out the rent increase every year? So I do believe it's given us a bit of that's part of the problem. I think the other part of it, what's skewing the statistics, and maybe our economists can weigh in on this, is what is coming online here in Eugene? Workforce housing? No. Giant college high-rises. And those giant college high-rises with their amenities and their pools and their workout rooms and their granite counters and all of their lovely things are charging very high rents. So if you take that part out of the equation, I don't think you're going to be seeing that your average landlord is increasing rent by the maximum every year.
Thank you. Let me give you both an additional 30 seconds. Tim, go ahead.
So I want to comment, the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association's hotline receives a lot of callers who call and complain, or call and share their concerns about what they're facing. So everything from rental application conversations to I'm being evicted and I need some help. In October, when the new 14.6% rent increase maximum was received, we began asking the question, how much is your rent being increased? For all the callers that contact us saying that they've received a rent increase, over half are saying that they're receiving the maximum rent increase. So I'm not sure where the conversation of self-reporting that landlords are only charging about 5% is happening. From our perspective to tenants, they're receiving the maximum amount possible.
And Tia?
Yes.
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think what you've got to take into consideration there is, and we don't have the data, I think that would be helpful, of those ones who are getting the maximum, where were those rents at? Were they so far below the market that the landlord's only choice is to max out that rent increase every year as much as they can so that they can keep up with inflation, so that they can keep up with the cost of having a rental property? There's a lot of costs involved. A landlord has to be ready to, replace a $10,000, $12,000 furnace, an $8,000 roof, a $2,500 main line. You've got to have replacement reserves.
Thank you. Our next question will first go to Tia. And going back to the Phase 2 renter protection proposal, one part of that is a requirement that landlords would process applications in the order in which they are received. Now, I know you said you have long-term renters and probably are not processing a lot of new applications in any given year, but you represent other property owners who do. Why would a landlord not process an application in the order in which they're received, and what do you think about this proposal?
Well, I have no idea why that would be, because we educate our members that that's what they should be doing to avoid claims of discrimination. However, looking at it objectively, if you have two different applicants and one says, hey, I want to be in this school district, I've been looking for a place here, and the other's like, no, I'm only in town for 6 or 8 months, there can be good business reasons why you would select one renter over another. But it is our policy, and it is our, when I'm educating, which I do all the time to our members, that they do process order applications in the order they are received, and I believe all our property managers are doing that. Misty's nodding her head. It's just best practices in regards to avoiding fair housing and discrimination complaints. So that is what we encourage people to do.
Processing applications first come, first served is an anti-discrimination policy, and it does prevent what's colloquially referred to as cherry picking. Some landlords find significant value in what a credit score is for a tenant. So what they'll do is batch run every single applicant and pick out the one that has the highest credit score and no other consideration. This is a common problem that's happening in our community, and there's other insidious problems that are happening, such as landlords who are only picking tenants who have white-sounding names. I want to be abundantly clear, as what I said earlier in my opening statements, tenants of color take twice as long to seek rental housing than white tenants. There is a problem in our current way that we're doing application processing, and first come, first serve is one step to addressing that.
Tim, the state of Oregon, to a certain extent, regulates landlord-tenant relationships. You've referenced a state bill already so far. So with that as a backdrop, why should the city of Eugene enact regulations that differ from what the state already has in place and applies to other communities in our region?
Sure. As Tim Dewey had mentioned, in the Lane County area, we are 32,000 housing units behind, which means that rents are significantly high and tenants are falling into houselessness and homelessness. We've received several awards, which are terrible, that we are the second highest cost city to live in, second only to Seattle, that we have the highest homeless population per capita in the entire United States of America. I want to be abundantly clear that the issues that we're facing are distinctly and singularly Eugene issues. And so the city of Eugene must step up and address those issues, because if we don't, then we're going to continue this trend where 1 out of 7 Eugenians are paying more than half of their entire income on rent and rent alone.
Question again, please?
The question about why should the city of Eugene have specific...
Yeah. Well, they shouldn't, because it definitely creates an incentive for landlords to build elsewhere, to have rentals elsewhere. It encourages Eugene landlords to sell, because just a couple miles away is a rental where they don't have to put up with this. We're not opposed to renter protections. Again, I just want to iterate that there are a plethora of renter protections in the law. Renters just don't know how to hold their landlord accountable. It's an education thing, and it's something I help renters with too. I work both sides of this. I have landlord clients mostly, but I do have tenant clients, and I help them as well. And so many of them are surprised at what they can get. If they just know how to document as a landlord documents, hold their landlord accountable, put things in writing, it's not rocket science. It's a skill set that needs to be taught to our young people.
Thank you. Tia, we'll stick with you for this one. Another element in the Phase 2 proposal, and hopefully I'm describing this right, it's a little complicated, but it would limit security deposits to twice the amount of 1 month's worth of rent, as I understand it. So, as we've heard, rent can be expensive anywhere, but especially in Eugene. So, pretty typical to have $1,000 or more. That's probably $1,000 if you're lucky, but maybe $1,500 per month. So, with that cap, you could still be shelling out literally thousands of dollars as a prospective tenant before you even spend one night in your new rental dwelling. Is asking people to pay several $1,000s before they move in a reasonable expectation, especially for people on a limited income?
Well, the market controls what you can get. If you set a security deposit too high, you won't rent your unit. I have no problem with a maximum double deposit. I think that's a reasonable amount, right? We're not opposed to that in any way that I'm aware of. So for me, I think the other thing we're seeing is, you're right, it is so hard to get into housing and having to put all of this money out. We're seeing these new programs coming up where insurance companies are basic, and I don't know if they're any good. We're working on the details, but that's a solution, right? Is that we have a sort of almost an insurance policy. The tenant pays a small monthly stipend, and the unit is covered up to a certain amount in damages.
During the Eugene Renter Protections Phase 1 and 2 public hearings here in the city of Eugene, several landlords came up and spoke about what they charge for security deposits. Some say they only charge first month's rent and nothing else. Some say they charge 3 or 4 or 5 times the month rent. I myself paid 6 times my monthly rent for my unit, which is an obscene amount, and I'm glad to have my apartment because we are in a city that has a 2% vacancy rate. Again, if there's a unit that comes on the market, 20 applicants will come in. So tenants are finding whatever's available, regardless if it's in their school district, regardless if it's within close proximity of their work, they're only finding what units are available. I want to be abundantly clear, two apartment units that are on the same street right next door to each other that have 2 different landlords will have wildly varying experiences. One will pay $1,000, one will pay $6,000. How can you plan for that? How can you plan to move or to find new housing? And especially if you've been evicted and removed from your home, how can you do that in 30 or 90 days?
Well, Tim, I'll follow up on that response a little bit. And Tia mentioned the sort of this idea of the market. The market will decide what is fundamentally wrong with, in the situation of the side-by-side houses, of saying, well, the more attractive offer will be more attractive, as it were, and the less attractive offer won't be a good business decision for the property owner. Why should the government step in that case?
The government steps in when there's common sense consumer protections necessary. This is a common practice that happens in every other businesses. When one particular part of a contract or one particular party is being taken advantage of or being exploited in several different ways, then the government should step in and address that. This is something that we see on every different other issue. So why not rentals?
And I've never heard of anyone charging a 5 or 6 times the monthly rent security deposit. That to me sounds outrageous. The only reason landlords generally increase security deposits is for an applicant's failure to meet criteria. They don't have enough rental history, they don't have enough income, maybe they have some shaky credit, something in their past that makes them a higher risk. And that's what screening is. It's a risk assessment. It's like you're handing someone a suitcase with $250,000 to $500,000 in it, saying, take good care of my suitcase full of money, return it to me at the end of the relationship minus normal wear and tear. So when we're screening, we're assessing the risk that a person poses to our hard-earned asset, what we have put blood, sweat, and tears into. I can't imagine anybody renting a place if they're charging a 5 times. That's a new one to me. So I wouldn't have paid it and would have looked elsewhere.
Thank you. This next question, I kind of got out of order there, so I'm going to go back to Tim again to respond first. Programs that help people pay their rent, which are being discussed in Salem right now, they don't in and of themselves create more physical housing. And we've heard about supply and demand issues at play in terms of the supply of housing, and especially affordable housing in all of Oregon, but especially in the Eugene area. So what is the best way, what are some policies to increase that supply, while at the same time recognizing there's a limit to the number of construction workers, so to speak, who can build a housing unit in a given year. And there's land use regulations. We could build all the way up and down the Willamette Valley, but there are costs to that as well. So how do you encourage a housing supply while taking those other limitations and concerns into account?
As I shared in my opening statement, housing supply and renter protections are 2 different issues. And while they may intersect with each other, it's not a either or, it's a yes and. Renter protections, as we've seen in the city of Portland that passed in 2017, increased the amount of housing production that happens by more than 20% than the previous year. I don't know what else to say about that because we are facing economic consequences of the low lack of housing supply, which has so many different factors. And renter protections may or may not be one of those, but from my perspective, what we are doing right now, what we are advocating for is keeping people in their home, not building new housing. This is the conversation about making sure that we're keeping vulnerable community members, seniors and elders, students, people of color, families with children, veterans, disabled folks, all of which are vulnerable communities that by and large face more discrimination than white male average wealth tenants. That's what we're talking about. And knowing that we're receiving more people coming to the state of Oregon than that are leaving, and the people that are coming to the state of Oregon tend to be white, male, wealthy people, what kind of cities are we truly advocating for if we are removing vulnerable communities and only accepting white men?
I think that's one of the best things that came out of COVID, right? It was a bad thing, but some good things came out of it. One of those was a bridge, funding for housing. Legal aid helped several of my clients keep their tenants housed when those renters could not afford the rent, and we ended up in eviction court. And so that's one of the things that I think is wonderful, is a permanently established rent assistance fund that vulnerable and needy people can do to bridge that gap, to bridge that injury, that illness, that car breakdown, the accident that happens, the job loss that happens, and I want to see us do that. The other way to solve this problem is with creative thinking. There are so many cool things that we could do to create housing that doesn't have to be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, that can be tiny house communities, that can be, I watched a TED Talk a while back on a guy who got his investors together, and they put together, I think it was a 25-unit complex in Portland, where the rooms cost $500 a month to rent. There was a shared bathroom up the hall and a shared kitchen. But a person had a decent, safe place to live for a reasonable amount. It wasn't your ideal, I get a whole house and a yard and everything else. But we've got to be able to add to our concept of what kind of housing is needed. We don't need all this big housing. The other thing I would like to point out is how Eugene drug its feet after the bill was passed mandating ADUs in the city limits. Springfield got right on it, waived systems development charges.
I'm going to jump in here and say thank
Stop
you.
me,
Yeah.
okay.
All right. Thank you.
Got me on a roll.
So I want to draw, so this question will first go to you, Tia, and I want to draw on both of your experiences in this, and maybe this is more of sort of a practical question than a policy question. What in your opinion, is the number one thing that a renter can do currently to maintain a good relationship with the property owner? Or are good relationships even sort of the goal here in what is fundamentally a business kind of relationship?
Well, it's simple. Take care of the property, be a good neighbor, and pay your rent. Let your landlord know when there's a problem. That's it. And when I'm teaching classes on screening, I tell people that's all that you care about when you're screening. Can they pay the rent? Will they be a good neighbor? Will they take care of the property? I don't care who you love. I don't care what color you are. I don't care about anything else except that. And nobody should care about anything else but that. It's a matter of protecting that asset.
There are 36,000 rental units in the city of Eugene alone. And while that's a great sentiment, and I appreciate that there's no discrimination against tenants who may love someone else, may have different skin color than our own, may have different religions, there are people in our community that don't share those same values. There are people in our community that actively attempt to discriminate and attempt to remove vulnerable tenants in our community. And women of color are twice as likely to be evicted than their white counterparts. Black, female-led households are twice as likely to be evicted than their white counterparts. Tenants of color take twice as long to find new rental housing. And the only evidence of that is discrimination. So while it is nice to have good relationships with your landlord, I think the best way to address this is for the city of Eugene to implement new renter protections so that the conversation between landlord and tenant can be done at arm's length and can be done on equal, fair footing.
Thank you. Tim, this question is for you, and I don't want to sort of make any assumptions about what City Council is going to do with Phase 2, but if you look at the website, there's sort of talk of a Phase 3. And so assuming that what's on the table currently passes, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but if you were writing Phase 3 of the renter protection package, what is the number one thing or number two, top two things that hasn't been included so far that you would add?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Phase 3 does have have something, the Housing Policy Board had made a recommendation of somewhere between 12 and 13 different recommendations to implement.
Okay, well, so let me reframe that a little bit. What would you like the city council to approve in a hypothetical? I mean, there's no guarantee that they'll pass anything, but what would you like specifically to be in the phase 3?
It's a challenging question. Phase 3 does have already some protections that are included in that.
Well, then tell us what they are and how you support them.
Excuse me, I am forgetting. As in preparation of phase 1 and phase 2, I have accidentally sort of forgotten what phase 3 is. So we're playing catch up, and we're also having conversations during the Oregon legislature about several other bills that are happening as well. So I'm at the moment forgetting what phase 3 is. Right now in phase 2, there is a tenant advocates have been advocating for a small landlord compensation fund, so that any landlord who engages in displacement prevention assistant and are lower income can bring on that fund and be able to help pay for that no-cause eviction, which again is an optional tool. I'm struggling to think of what else to put in phase 3, but I'm encouraged that the city of Eugene is having these conversations, especially facing what our own economic outlook is, and I'm enthused that the city of Eugene is also engaging at the state level to be able to have conversations of what makes sense for us and what makes sense for the state of Oregon.
I too have forgotten what's in phase 3. I think the more concerning thing was displacement prevention assistance in the first year. So I'm struggling with that question as well. You got anything else?
Sure. Well,
Really fast.
no, that's all right. Apologize for that. Well, we just have time for maybe another question, and then we'll move into closing statements. And I guess the last question maybe is, as a journalist, we try to think very carefully about word choices, and we're cautioned against using the word reform because one person's reform is another person's catastrophe or terrible idea. And so the conversation both here today and at the city council level is phrased around, uses the phrase renter protection or tenant protections. And I don't want to be like, won't anybody think of the landlords, but at the same time, landlords have a stake in this as well. Do you think, Tia, that the way the conversation is framed is fundamentally fair to the members of your association?
Well, I don't think that was its intent. I mean, its intent is to see if we can do overlays to further, limit a landlord's right to their own property. So what I'm concerned about is what does it do to the people here? What does it do to landlords here? Implementing displacement prevention assistance in the first year is going to force a landlord to have to terminate for cause if they want to terminate. A lot of times things don't work out for whatever reason, and we need that opportunity to be able to do that. I was pleased that they came up with the landlord compensation fund. It was more my idea in that was to provide a compensation fund for tenants who need it. So I staffed the landlord helpline in Portland, and I was hearing stories about landlords who make $50,000 a year having to pay $4,500 to their tenants who make $100,000 a year to move. Not every renter needs displacement prevention assistance, and so my idea was to come up with a fund to help for those who did. But that would probably be easier to do it with the landlord. And so I thought that was a reasonable compromise to give us something.
It's being referred to as renter protections. I think another way to refer to it is homelessness prevention. These policies came from the Renters Protection Committee, which is a subset of the Housing Policy Board. So I think it's just being colloquially referred to based on that Renter Protection Committee. I know Councilor Zelenka has made an effort to rename these protections the Norton Campbell protections, which he was the former chair of the Housing Policy Board, initiated a lot of these conversations and unfortunately passed away halfway through the conversation. So is it being referred in that way? I believe so. But I think that I'll stop there. I think that there are a significant amount of reasons to be able to look at these situations that tenants are facing every day and recognize that it is not working, and that we have a city where 1 out of 7 people living here are paying more than half of their income on just rent. What's happening right now is simply not working.
Thanks to both of you for your thoughts and input and conversation today. We'll move now to closing statements of about a minute each. First from Tia Politi, and then we'll go directly to Tim Morris.
Great. I appreciate the opportunity to share our perspectives. We're not diametrically opposed by any means. My renters are my valued customers. Like any business owner, I have to take care of my customers or somebody else will. Landlords don't go around willy-nilly evicting people for no reason. It's a bad business model to do that. Our goal is to get a good long-term renter who will stay and stay and stay and pay and pay and pay. And we don't have the turnover. When the unit's vacant, money's going out and no money's coming in. That mortgage still has to be paid. Those taxes and insurance still have to be paid. We don't go around booting out a perfectly good renter for no reason. So I want everyone to kind of understand that. I also want you to understand that it's our mission at Lane Rental Owners Association to teach y'all how to do things the right way if you're a landlord, to treat your renter with compassion and respect and dignity, to provide a quality product to them at a fair price, and to not discriminate, not retaliate, and not do anything else that can get a landlord into big trouble.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I think that, or today, excuse me. I think that these protections, I'm doing a speech tonight. I think that these protections are incredibly important, and the urgent need for Phase 2 renter protections is clear and abundant. Tenants are not asking for special treatment or for new protections that only protect them. What tenants are asking for is dignity, justice, and equal footing during the landlord-tenant relationship. Housing justice is climate justice. Housing justice is healthcare justice. Housing justice prevents homelessness. These are issues that our city is facing every day, and addressing how the renter-landlord relationship operates is essential. I hope that, if anything, you walk away today with knowing that a lot of these conversations are not either or, they're yes and that our community has spoken about these particular protections for 5, 6, 7 years now. It's time that we implement them, and it's time that we protect those most vulnerable in our community. Thank you.
This has been the City Club of Eugene's June 9th, 2023 Forum on Rental Housing and Tenant Protections in Eugene. Please join me once again in thanking our guest moderator, Chris Lehman of KLCC, and our guest speakers, the University of Oregon Professor Tim Dewey, Springfield Eugene Tenant Association Executive Director Tim Morris, and Tia Politi, the President of the Rental Owners Association of Lane County. Next week, the City Club will be off in celebration of Juneteenth, but we will be back on June 23rd for a conversation with Eugene's City Manager, Sarah Mederi. A special thanks and acknowledgement to all City Club volunteers who made this and all of our programs possible. Thank you also to City Club's in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing LLC, and Dot Dotson's Photography. Also a special thank you to Chris's radio station, KLCC, for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 p.m. For those listening at home right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning into City Club on KLCC. We love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. Lastly, as you know, the City Club of Eugene is a nearly all-volunteer, independent, nonprofit organization. Without our members and volunteers, we could not do what we do. So this week, I'd like to recognize one of those volunteers, Sabrina Greiton, a new member of our program committee and the co-producer of today's program. Indeed. Sabrina, we're lucky to have your smarts and your service-minded soul at City Club, so thank you. Thank you also to this week's new and renewing members and donors. Especially thank you to our members who have already contributed during City Club's annual campaign, which is going on now. Your support makes our work possible. And one last thank you today. We have special guests, to me anyway. My mother and father are here today, and not only are they here, but they are celebrating 50 years of marriage today. So can we give them a round of applause for that? A lot of stories over 50 years, and a lot of civic engagement. You guys are why I'm up here, so thank you. I love you. Thank you all for joining us at the City Club of Eugene. Take care, and we'll see you next week.